enjoy a good racing game. I mean, I like a lot of genres of games, to be sure. For instance, from a modern game perspective, I've been going through the Yakuza series over the last few years, trying to get caught up, and somehow Ryu Ga Gotoku has managed to make excellent games in both the beat-em-up and RPG genres, something that I was completely not expecting to work. But racing games, I don't know, there's just something about them. I would say relaxing, but that's not quite right, as many times you're going to be all amped up trying to hold on to a tenuous lead or desperately trying to claw your way back into contention after perhaps taking a bad turn or getting into another car. Maybe it's because driving is something that I actually do every day in real life, and on some level the racing game is tying into my actual experience, as opposed to blowing away people with an M60 or casting a fireball. Believe it or not, I did not serve in the military, and my mana level is usually pretty tapped out these days. In the 90s, the racing genre really began to flourish on home consoles. That's not to say that they were all winners, but whether it was an arcade port or something completely original, fun and exciting racing games were readily available for play at home. Today's game comes from that latter category because as much fun as it is to play games on real racetracks with real cars, sometimes you need something a bit more fantastical, but yet still has some ties to the real world. However, I should probably pause for a second because I'm sure that there's some of you out there that don't know me and are confused about why I would be talking about Japanese crime syndicates when the title of the video clearly indicates that I should be talking about something that should be narrated by John Masuchita Jr. And no, I will not try to do an impression of him, as I stopped doing cocaine years ago. Hi, my name is Dave, and welcome to Zilog and Moto, the channel where the only medications that this host needs to get through the day is Linsapril and maybe some caffeine. Okay, definitely caffeine. Anyway, I'm out to collect and review the nearly 1,280 titles released in the English language for the Sega Master System, Genesis/Mega Drive, Sega or Mega CD as the case may be, and finally the 32X. Basically, if I can plug it into a Genesis either by itself or with some sort of add-on and be able to read what's up on the screen, I'm trying to get a copy of it and review it for posterity, with both looks at that original packaging and gameplay captured from original hardware whenever possible. Having said all that, if you don't know what Micro Machines are, do yourself a favor and go look up Micro Machines commercials on YouTube, and you'll pretty quickly understand that John Masuchita Jr. reference, pun fully intended. In short, Micro Machines are like Hot Wheels or Matchbox cars, just smaller. Micro, if you will. Previously on the channel, I've looked at two games in the Micro Machines series, the original Micro Machines for the Genesis back in episode 45, and Micro Machines 2 Turbo Tournament in episode 146. And yes, there's also what I hear is a pretty solid port of the original Micro Machines for the Master System that I'll be reviewing at some point in the future. I would have done it already, but there's some technical mumbo-jumbo with that title that I'll save for that review. Thanks, Codemasters. Micro Machines Turbo Tournament 96, as you might have inferred from the title, is a direct sequel to Micro Machines 2 Turbo Tournament, coming out slightly less than a year after Micro Machines 2 in October of 1995, exclusively in PAL regions. So is Turbo Tournament 96 the biggest and baddest game in the series so far? Or is it possible that Codemasters slipped up and maybe let the game try to coast on the license name and pedigree of the previous titles? Well, we shall see, but first a look at that imported package. And here's my copy of Micro Machines Turbo Tournament 96 for the Mega Drive. And as mentioned, I say Mega Drive specifically because this one is a European exclusive. And unlike Micro Machines 2, this game wasn't even planned for a release in the United States. The hang tab is intact at the top of the case, but unfortunately the outer cover is a little bit dinged up, some scratches here and there, and the plastic is starting to separate a little bit on the back. But thankfully, other than some edge wear, the inner cover still looks pretty good, with no water damage or sun bleaching. This copy isn't quite as nice as some of the games that I've featured recently on the channel, but it's still respectable, and with it being an import and not exactly easy to get your hands on, at least in the United States, I'm good with it as is. If you decide you want one for yourself, right now Price Charting has it going for only about $20, but just remember you're going to have to throw at least 15 more on top of that to get it shipped across the pond.
As far as the front art goes, I think this is a very solid and action-packed cover, and it should be mentioned that due to Codemasters doing their own production for this, they weren't locked into the Mega Drive formatting, and actually had the entire cover to work with. And considering all the little small details here and there, I think that's important. The art showcases a race between 4 different colored cars in a science lab setting, which is one of the type of tracks that you'll be racing on in-game, and I just love all the little details, like the headlight beams, the shadows from the cars down on the periodic table that's serving as the track, and the blur showing the speed of the cars. I mean, clearly a lot of effort was put into this. The logo looks great at the top, with the 96 standing out so that players knew immediately that this was a new release and not the same old game. And they even found room to not only mention that this game has the new construction kit feature, but also that Sega Power gave it a 95% and called it the best racing game ever via a sticker slapped on the front of the case. And for all you Yestrazine fans out there, and if you're not, you should be, this was from Sega Power issue 72, November 1995. So go bug him to do a video about this and see if he can explain what that Ace Fresh look is all about. Since there's no other regions to look at, we'll go ahead and flip over to the back, and thankfully it's only in English. However, even though there's only one language featured, some of this font is still of the type to make you go look for your magnifying glass. I do like the tagline at the top, "New tracks, new challenges, new drivers, and more!" It just reads like one of those classic monster truck rally ads. Sunday, 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 you know the type. Despite the small font, they do a solid job of discussing all the game features, including dedicating a decent amount of space to that aforementioned construction kit and the built-in 4 and technically up to 8 player options. And to top it all off, there's tons of good quality screenshots on the back showing off what the game has to offer. Opening up the box, and you'll immediately see that this is a J-Kart cartridge, meaning that with the 2 game ports included in the cart, you don't need a 4-player adapter, just 4 controllers. In fact, Codemasters was so behind the multiplayer aspect of the game that they originally included both tournament invitations and winner certificates that you could hand out to your friends, but unfortunately I don't have those with my copy. The manual that I do have is a little rough, seems like it may have been chewed on by a pet or younger sibling at some point, but like the back of the package, it's dedicated to just English, so that's nice. There's a bunch of game modes to select from here, not to mention the construction kit, and the manual is definitely helpful to have for figuring all that out. Plus the graphic design is very solid, so just like the cover, there was clearly some effort that went into this packaging. Okay, that's the physical aspect of Micro Machines Turbo Tournament 96. Let's get into the game and see what's changed since the last time out. If you haven't played Micro Machines 2 or seen my review of the game, then of course all this is going to be new territory for you. But if you have had experience with Micro Machines 2, Turbo Tournament 96 is going to be immediately reminiscent of that title. But not necessarily to the point where Codemasters appeared to be like a sports game publisher who was complacent enough to just throw a year on the game and call it a day. Hardball 94 and Accolade, I'm looking squarely at you. No, for Turbo Tournament 96, developer Supersonic Software took on the idea of bigger, faster, and more for the sequel, and somehow managed to squeeze all that new content into the same sized 8 megabit cartridge that was used for the previous game. Now, you might be thinking, well, isn't 8 megabits a bit on the small side for a 16-bit game that was released a few months after the Sega Saturn and almost into 1996? And yes, you certainly would not be wrong for thinking that, as games of that generation had long since commonly eclipsed that size. However, I think there's 2 things you have to keep in mind when talking about a Micro Machines game, with the first being that the focus on the series has always been about gameplay over graphics, which allowed the developers to keep their relatively micro for late 1995 sized cartridges in use. You see what I did there? Yeah, you saw it. But along with the style of game lending itself to a smaller ROM footprint, the cartridge contains 2 features that would certainly increase production cost, not to mention space on the board itself. And those are NVRAM and 2 additional controller ports built right in the cartridge itself. The NVRAM, or non-volatile RAM, is an alternative to battery backup, and is essentially rewritable storage that doesn't get erased when the game console is turned off. It's a nice feature because you no longer have to worry about having to solder in a new battery if it ever dies. You just have to pray that the NVRAM chip never goes bad. And then there's the 2 additional controller ports. This type of cartridge, dubbed a J-Cart by Codemasters, didn't originate with Turbo Tournament 96 and was previously used with Micro Machines 2 and was also used in 4 other Codemasters titles. If you're not aware, 4-player support for games on the Genesis can be somewhat confusing, with some cartridges requiring Electronic Arts 4-way play adapter and then some cartridges requiring Sega's own team player adapter. It was a bit of a mess. The J-Cart does away with all that madness, and along with some pretty slick programming on Supersonic Software's part, any port can be used to play the game at any time, and they seem to be pretty compatible with most recent wireless controllers as well. If we're being honest though, from a physical feature standpoint, there's nothing new here. The 8 megabit cartridge size, the NVRAM instead of battery backup, the J-Cart, this was all done a year before on Micro Machines 2. It doesn't mean any of those things aren't nice, although I suppose the megabit size is debatable. It just means that Turbo Tournament 96 isn't going to get any bonus points for those particular features. So, where does Turbo Tournament 96 separate itself from Micro Machines 2? Well, the first and most obvious change between the games is a whole new slate of tracks to race on, with the back of the box advertising over 60 completely new tracks, which are split into several different race game modes. Also, one of the things that's always signified the Micro Machines series is the backgrounds used for the tracks, and with all of them being based around kids playing with cars like in their house, and there's new backgrounds here that weren't in the previous game. As much as I like the traditional pool table or pinball machine or workshop table environments, it's nice to see the developers not just trotting out new track configurations with these same old locations. Along with those new track environments, Turbo Tournament 96 includes new vehicles to race with as well. The tracks still predetermine which cars can be used for the race, so it's not like you can choose from the different vehicles, unless you're in the construction mode, more on that in a bit. But the vehicles do handle differently from one another, making moving from track to track not just an adjustment of a player needing to know where to turn, but also perhaps knowing that based on which vehicle is being used, they may need to drive more aggressive to keep up, or more conservative to attempt to avoid skidding into oblivion or crashing into a wall. Okay, well, we've determined that there's new tracks to race on and new cars or other things to drive, but what about game modes? Is there more to do here than there was in Micro Machines 2? And the answer to that is definitely yes, but not necessarily in the way you might be thinking. In reality, all of the game modes that you would be expecting from Micro Machines 2 have been ported over, so there's not really anything new from a game mode perspective, but there have been some tweaks. In non-team mode, each of the 4 game modes, Challenge, Head-to-Head, Time Trial Challenge, and League, they've all been split into 2 versions, with a regular version and a pro version, with the regular version featuring less difficult tracks and the pro version, of course, being more difficult. Also, due to the splitting of tracks, League mode now also only features 3 divisions rather than the previous 4, I'm assuming just because they ran out of tracks. However, Team mode remains largely unchanged from the previous game, except now that the game features 7 tournaments for players to compete in rather than just 3. What does this all mean for players? Well, from a basic perspective, if you were a fan of Micro Machines 2, it's basically everything that game had, but more of it, and with a fresh coat of paint. And Micro Machines 2 was a solid effort, especially from a multiplayer perspective. However, when I reviewed Micro Machines 2, I've got to be honest, I had some issues with the game. And this is where things are going to get a little controversial, I'm sure. But keep in mind, these views are mine, and mine alone, and if you out there don't agree, that's totally fine. My main complaint about the game previously was the difficulty. Now, this is something that's not necessarily going to apply to multiplayer modes, so keep that in mind that I'm only somewhat referring to that. The design of the game is as a top-down racer, which works well to show off the colorful and fun backgrounds that you're racing in. However, what doesn't work well for a top-down racer is that you can only see a very small portion of the track at a time, and you can't see what's ahead of you, whether it's a turn, an obstacle, the edge of the table, or another competitor. compounding matters, there's no mini-map of the track present, so even if you've memorized the tracks and know where certain things are, you never really have a good feel of where exactly you are, which is a problem for not knowing perhaps when you need to slow down or get in position to go across a bridge without falling down to your doom, etc. It's something that worked okay when the series debuted on the NES, but now that the tracks have gotten more complicated and the action has gotten faster in places, it really isn't fun at times. Turbo Tournament 96 unfortunately doesn't do anything to solve this problem. Well, okay, I suppose there was one small change. Even though there's still no minimap present during races, before a race starts, you're now presented with a look at the track, so you can at least get a feel for its shape and potentially where to plan your turns. Considering Micro Machines 2 didn't have anything to let you know the design of the track ahead of time, this is at least a step in the right direction. But it's a baby step at best, and not much help actually during the race. But while progress was made on that front, unfortunately the game appears to have regressed as well. And I'm not exactly sure what's going on here, because while Micro Machines 2 was difficult due to the aforementioned design issues, Turbo Tournament 96 appears to crank things up a notch by messing with the controls. And honestly, saying that it's not fun in places due to this is underselling things a bit. There were multiple times on many different tracks when I was ready to hurl my controller across the room in frustration, and frequently that was on relatively simple tracks that I knew well. So, what's going on here? What went so wrong? Well, the first mistake I made was running the game natively in NTSC mode rather than PAL mode. This causes the game to run slightly faster, and even though the game technically functions with no issues, you're going to want to slow things down as much as possible. That one's on me, and I seem to remember that I think I made the same mistake with Micro Machines 2 at first. However, even when running the game in PAL mode, most of the vehicles in the game are very hard to control. For whatever reason, any car that's reasonably fast tends to slide all over the track, as if every home racing surface you're playing on was just recently washed and waxed. This combined with the fact that any type of debris on the track pops you up in the air, which means that unless you just hit everything just about perfectly, you're going to be careening over edges or missing jumps or just in general being too slow to be competitive. And don't even think about trying to be in control when it comes to the jet races, where the only way I found not to crash into things was to ride the brake almost the entire race, which is not exactly helpful when you're trying to be competitive. And finally, to add insult to injury, I specifically experienced a situation in which I was actually neck and neck with the top computer opponent, usually the blue car, much like how the silver truck is usually best in Super Off-Road, and even though I was going flat out, the computer was able to cheat and go faster. This was pretty much the final straw for me. The game is difficult enough, there's no need for the computer to be able to cheat to win. Hell, all the cars in the race are exactly the same, and unlike Mario Kart, the colorful cast of characters that you can pick from to race as don't affect any of your attributes. So the whole point is that everyone should be on even footing. Let's move away from the gameplay a bit. I didn't include any footage of this in the review, but one feature that has to be mentioned is the construction kit. The construction kit, which apparently originated in the DOS version of Micro Machines 2, allows you to do exactly what you would think and create your own races by choosing the background you want to race on, the vehicles you want to use, and then the layout of the track via pre-designed tiles. These type of customized game elements normally are more common on home computer versions of games, so to see it included here is pretty cool, and Codemasters even came up with a way of allowing people to share their tracks with one another, by coming up with a password system to support importing and exporting of tracks, to go along with the NVRAM for saving locally. I think the only issue I had with the construction kit was that it didn't appear, and maybe I was doing something wrong, that the tracks could be raced in single-player mode, and since computer opponents don't run on the custom tracks, if you've only got one player available, this mode might be somewhat problematic for you. But overall, it's a great feature, and definitely seems like where a lot of the development of this title over Micro Machines 2 might have been focused. The graphics in the game are exactly what you would expect from a Micro Machines game if you've played the first two. Colorful, fun environments with a good variety of locales to keep things interesting. With 95% of the game's movement revolving around just the 4-car sprites, things move quickly, perhaps too quickly in certain situations, but there's definitely no slowdown or any other graphical issues. However, you wouldn't be wrong if you were to look at the game and think that it might look a bit outdated. As mentioned, 32-bit consoles were already on the scene at this point, even in Europe, so if graphics were your key thing in games, Turbo Tournament 96 probably isn't going to do much for you. Virtual Racing, this is not. From a sound perspective, like the graphics, Turbo Tournament 96 isn't really doing anything new or innovative. The music is solid, and while it does sound similar to what was used in Micro Machines 2, I don't think they're the same tracks, at least not from what I could pick up on, and perhaps they were just composed using the same synths. Also, while there's nothing wrong with the music, it also only plays during menus, as a rule, so you won't be hearing it during races. Instead, the races are just sound effect affairs, with lots of engine noise and skidding of tires, which is interesting considering how little traction the cars have, but I digress. I can't say anything bad about the sound effects either. It seems like there's enough of them to fill out the game, and they appear to be of good quality, but some of the engine noise is definitely familiar, and I started to have flashbacks to the elevators in Impossible Mission while driving. Hearing "destroy him, my robots" in my head certainly didn't make trying to avoid those piles of baked beans and turns any easier. Micro Machines Turbo Tournament 96 to me is a disappointment. But I'm going to throw a caveat in here. I play these games as a rule in single player mode, and much like a game like Mario Kart, it's not really designed for single player. It's designed to have 4 kids in a room yelling at each other because someone fell off a table while someone else may or may not have assisted in them falling off said table. So because of that, I'm going to cheat a bit here, not unlike the computer in the game. If you're looking for a single player racing game, even with its many options and modes, there's simply better games out there. And honestly, I think Micro Machines 2 was better balanced. So, due to that, if you're a single-player gamer, I'm sorry, I know it might be sacrilegious, but I'm only going to give Turbo Tournament 96 2 stars. However, if you're looking for a party game that you can get 4 or even potentially more if you're into sharing controllers, players together, and possibly start some fights that you'll regret in the morning, then go ahead and bump this rating up to 3 stars. I think that's totally fair.
Okay, and that is it for Micro Machines Turbo Tournament 96. I've got to say, when I say this game was a disappointment, I do really mean that, because I love the idea behind the game, and the fact that it brought back all of those great game options from the previous title, it seemed like this would be a slam dunk, and something that I'd probably like at least as much as Micro Machines 2. Unfortunately, they simply didn't get the job done, and I think all of the things that I wish were better about Micro Machines 2 somehow got worse. Like, I can't believe those jet levels were even play tested. You literally might as well be knocking a hockey puck around an ice rink, except that the hockey puck explodes when it touches anything. I simply don't get it, but maybe it works better in multiplayer, who knows. Next time on Zilog and Moto, and I do think that I'm going to start saying next time rather than next week, because clearly I never know when the so-called leading antivirus endpoint protection software company is going to have a major oopsie. Well, it's been pretty British in here recently. Black Hole Assault from Core, Super Off-Road from Graph Gold, Micro Machines from Codemasters, Super Space Invaders from the Kremlin, and even Hardball 94 was developed by Mindspan, who was based in Canada. So I think it's time to change things up a bit and pick a goofy little title for the Genesis that is a US exclusive as a palate cleanser. That's right, we're swapping fish and chips for an outrageously expensive cheeseburger and chips. God bless America. Well, that's it for Zilog and Moto episode 247. If you liked what you saw here and want to see more, please think about liking and subscribing if you are so inclined, as it will help more people see these videos. But most importantly, whatever you like to play, have fun and be excellent to each other. Later.